Picture this. An entire civilization that communicated through pure thought, their crystalline cities stretching across continents like living art. The Keth-Mari were basically the galaxy's master builders, creating stuff so beautiful it made other species travel light years just to see it. These graceful beings move like dancers through impossible architecture, their whole society connected by psionic networks that let them share ideas instantly. But let me paint you a better picture of just how amazing these people were. Imagine walking through one of their cities on a Tuesday morning. The buildings weren't just structures, they were alive. Crystalline towers that grew from the ground like enormous trees, their surfaces shifting colors based on the collective mood of everyone inside. Gardens that floated in midair, with flowers that sang harmonies when the wind touched them. And the Keth-Mari themselves? They were like living sculptures, tall and elegant, with skin that shimmered like moonlight on water. Their whole civilization ran on shared thoughts. When one Keth-Mari had an idea, thousands could instantly understand it, improve it, and build on it. They didn't need meetings or emails or phone calls. An architect on one continent could share a vision, and within hours, engineers on the other side of their world would be bringing it to life. It was like having an entire internet in your head, but better, because it was pure understanding, pure connection. They built wonders that defied physics. Bridges made of solid light that you could walk across. Libraries where knowledge was stored in living crystals that would whisper secrets to anyone who touched them. Concert halls where music became visible, dancing to the air in ribbons of color and sound. Other species would travel for months just to spend a day in a Keth-Mari city. Tourism agencies across the galaxy had entire departments dedicated to organizing pilgrimages to their worlds. The Keth-Mari didn't just build beautiful things. They lived beautifully, too. Their entire culture was based on sharing, on collective creation, on making something greater than the sum of its parts. Children learned by connecting their minds to their teachers. Artists collaborated across continents without ever meeting face to face. Scientists shared discoveries instantly across their entire civilization. Then came the plague of silence. Nobody really knows where it started or why it happened. Some say it was a natural evolution gone wrong. Others think it was some kind of cosmic radiation that interfered with their brain chemistry. All we know is that in just 3 years, it wiped out their ability to connect mentally. Imagine losing the internet, phones, and speech all at once. But for the Keth-Mari, it was even worse than that. It was like suddenly going deaf and blind and mute all at the same time, except the deafness was in their souls. One day, they could share their thoughts with millions of their people. The next day, they were trapped alone in their own heads for the first time in their species' history. Their biotechnology started failing immediately. See, their whole civilization was based on collective knowledge. When you needed to fix something, you just connected to someone who knew how. When their cities needed maintenance, thousands of minds would work together to solve problems instantly. But suddenly, each Keth-Mari was on their own, trying to remember how to do things that had always been done by the group mind. Within months, their floating gardens crashed to the ground. Their living buildings started dying. Their crystal libraries went silent. The Keth-Mari couldn't maintain their tech, couldn't coordinate their society, couldn't even figure out how to ask each other for help because they'd never needed to develop individual communication methods. And you know what the rest of the galaxy did when they heard about this tragedy? They wrote them off as a failed species and quarantined them to die quietly. The Galactic Council, those cold-hearted bureaucrats, held emergency sessions and decided the Keth-Mari were no longer worth the investment. Just like that. No discussion of rescue missions or humanitarian aid. Just a cold calculation that these people were now worthless. Trade routes got rerouted around Keth-Mari space. Embassies were closed and diplomats recalled. Their magnificent cities became archaeological sites instead of living communities, with other species sending research teams to study the ruins while creators of those wonders were still alive and suffering inside them. Even the so-called wise species turned their backs. The ethereal communion, who claimed to value all consciousness, declared the Keth-Mari had lost their essential nature. The Vordak stopped their military patrols in Keth-Mari space, leaving them defenseless. The Zalani Consortium canceled trade agreements and moved their businesses elsewhere. In less than 5 years, A civilization that had created wonders spanning dozens of worlds was reduced to scattered survivors trying to grow food in the ruins of their crystal palaces. The beautiful ones were left to fade away in silence, abandoned by a galaxy that had once worshipped their art, but couldn't be bothered to help them in their darkest hour. Captain Tom Bradley was supposed to be doing a routine survey run in the outer spiral when his ship's sensors picked up something weird. The star chart said Kethmora Prime was dead, sterilized decades ago, but his instruments were detecting life signs. Tom had been flying survey missions for 12 years, and he'd seen plenty of weird readings before. Space is full of strange stuff that can fool your sensors. Solar flares, mineral deposits, even old automated systems still running on dead worlds. Most captains would have logged the anomaly and moved on, but Tom was different. He was the kind of guy who couldn't let a mystery go unsolved. He called his science officer, Dr. Lisa Park, to the bridge. Lisa had been studying the Kethmari for years before they disappeared from galactic politics. She knew more about their civilization than almost any human alive. When she saw the readings, her face went completely white. "Tom, this can't be right," she whispered, staring at the data. "The Council declared this world empty 15 years ago. They said the last survivors died out a decade ago. But the sensors don't lie. There were definitely life signs down there. Faint ones, scattered across what used to be the planet's greatest city." Tom's crew started running every scan they could think of. Thermal imaging showed heat signatures in the ruins. Atmospheric analysis detected carbon dioxide patterns that only came from breathing creatures. Even their basic radio equipment picked up what might have been organized sounds. Earth Command's orders were crystal clear. Survey missions were for mapping and mineral detection only. No contact with unknown species, no landing on potentially dangerous worlds, and definitely no investigation of anything that might require a rescue operation. Command was already stretched thin dealing with human colonies, and they didn't need captains going off on unauthorized adventures. But Tom looked at those life signs and thought about the stories he'd heard about the Kethmari, how they'd been abandoned by everyone else in the galaxy, how they'd been written off as a failed species and left to die alone. He made a decision that would change everything. Against direct orders from Earth Command, Tom authorized a landing party. He took a small team down in a shuttle, including Dr. Park and Chief Engineer Mike Torres. They expected to find maybe a few dozen survivors, possibly hostile, definitely desperate. What they found broke their hearts completely. Thousands of Kethmari survivors were living in the ruins of their crystal spires. But these weren't the glowing, graceful beings from the old videos. Their once shimmering skin was now pale and dull, like pearls that had lost their luster. They moved slowly, carefully, like people who had forgotten how to hope for anything good. The crystal towers that once reached toward the sky like frozen music were now cracked and dark. But the Kethmari had made homes in those ruins. They built simple shelters from the broken pieces of their former glory, creating small communities in the shadows of what they used to be. What amazed Tom's team was how they'd adapted to their silence. These people had developed an incredibly complex sign language, using their long, elegant fingers to create conversations in the air. They'd turned to physical art in ways they never had before, carving stories into stone and crystal, painting murals on the walls of their ruined buildings. But they were dying. Slowly, quietly, but definitely dying. The bioengineered food sources of civilization had depended on were failing one by one. The Kethmari had managed to keep some gardens alive through pure determination and careful tending, but it wasn't enough to feed thousands of people. Tom could see the signs of malnutrition in their thin frames and hollow cheeks. Dr. Park worked frantically with the ship's universal translator, trying to break through their new communication methods. It took hours of patient work, combining sign language recognition with analysis of their artistic symbols and even their body language patterns. When Tom's team finally managed to communicate with them, something happened that none of the humans expected. The first thing the Kethmari did wasn't beg for help. They didn't ask for food or medicine or rescue. They apologized. They actually apologized for being too weak and broken to properly welcome their unexpected guests. Through broken translations and careful gestures, they expressed shame that they couldn't offer the hospitality their culture had always valued. They were embarrassed that their once beautiful city was now in ruins, that they had nothing worthy to show these strangers who had come so far to visit them. Tom found himself fighting back tears as he watched these proud, gentle people blame themselves for their suffering. Here were beings who had been abandoned by the entire galaxy, left to star in the ruins of their civilization, and their first concern was that they might be disappointing their visitors. That's when Tom knew humanity had to act. He sent an emergency transmission back to Earth that night, breaking protocol completely. He didn't ask for permission or wait for authorization. He told Earth Command exactly what he'd found, and exactly what humanity needed to do about it. The galaxy had given up on the Kethmari, but Tom Bradley was about to make sure humanity never would. Tom's message back to Earth sparked something incredible. Within hours of receiving his transmission, every major news network was broadcasting the story. Pictures of the surviving Kethmari living in their ruined crystal cities spread across human space like wildfire. People saw those pale, gentle beings trying to grow food in the shadows of their former glory, and something deep in the human heart just clicked. It wasn't just governments that responded. Regular people started organizing relief efforts in their neighborhoods. School kids held bake sales to raise money for medical supplies. Factory workers volunteered for overtime shifts to produce extra food synthesizers. Retired engineers came out of retirement, begging to join the mission. Within weeks, human ships were loading up with medical supplies, food synthesizers, and communication tech. The first wave of ships launched from Earth barely 3 weeks after Tom's discovery. Captain Jenny Walsh led a convoy of 12 vessels, each one packed with everything the Kethmari might need. Doctors, engineers, linguists, farmers, teachers. Humanity sent its best people, not because they expected anything in return, but because it was simply the right thing to do. But the Galactic Council wasn't having it. Before the human ships had even reached Kethmari space, emergency sessions were being called across the galaxy. Ambassador Zeth Corian of the Galactic Council transmitted a formal warning to Earth within 48 hours of the first ship launch. The message was cold and bureaucratic. Humanity is hereby warned against interference with natural evolutionary processes. The Kethmari species has been classified as non-viable under Galactic Statute 847-C. Any attempt to artificially sustain their population constitutes a violation of cosmic natural law and will result in immediate economic sanctions against all human worlds. Think about that for a second. Here was a galactic government telling an entire species that they weren't allowed to help dying people because it might interfere with natural evolution, as if letting refugees starve in ruins was somehow the natural order of things. The other species watched with complete confusion as humans ignored these warnings and kept sending ships anyway. The militant Vorthak, with their warrior culture and emphasis on strength, called humans foolish for wasting resources on the weak. General Krekstov publicly stated that humanity was throwing good resources after bad genetics, and predicted human civilization would collapse within a generation due to this misguided compassion. The profit-focused Zilani Consortium was even more direct in their criticism. They ran economic projections showing that humanity's aid to the Kethmari would cost roughly 12 billion galactic credits over 5 years, with zero return on investment. Trade Minister Valesh called it economic suicide and suggested that humans clearly didn't understand basic resource management. Several Zilani companies preemptively canceled trade agreements with human colonies, expecting Earth's economy to crash. Even the supposedly enlightened ethereal communion, who claimed to value all forms of consciousness, suggested humanity's resources will be better spent elsewhere. High Advisor Laminos published a scholarly paper arguing that the Kethmari had served their purpose in the cosmic design, and that prolonging their existence would prevent other species from filling their ecological niche. But humans kept coming anyway. Every week brought new ships to Kethmari space, each one carrying people who would volunteer to spend months or even years helping strangers they'd never met. Engineers worked alongside surviving Kethmari to restore failing ecosystems, figuring out how to repair biotechnology that no human had ever seen before. Dr. Robert Kim spent 6 months learning Kethmari plant biology just so he could help save their last surviving food gardens. Linguists like Professor and Davies worked around the clock to preserve the Kethmari's evolving culture. They documented the new sign languages, recorded the stories being carved into crystal walls, and helped translate ancient Kethmari poetry into forms that could survive their new reality. Davies later said it was like watching a civilization reinvent itself in real time, and she felt honored to witness it. Human doctors treated diseases that had gone unchecked for decades. Dr. Paul Henderson set up the first mobile clinic in the ruins of the capital city, working 18-hour days to help Kethmari children who had never known proper medical care. He learned to adapt human medicine to Kethmari biology, often inventing new treatments on the spot. Every human ship that arrived brought hope to beings the galaxy had already forgotten. But more than that, each ship brought proof that someone in the universe still cared whether they lived or died. The Kethmari had spent 15 years believing they were alone, abandoned, worthless. Suddenly, strangers were crossing space just to help them survive. The galaxy's most powerful civilizations had written them off as a failed species. But humanity looked at the Kethmari and saw what they really were. People who deserved to live, regardless of whether they were profitable or strategically useful. And no amount of threats or sanctions was going to change that simple human truth. 2 years later, something magical happened. The Kethmari bio gardens bloomed across 7 worlds, their flowers creating new light patterns that told the story of survival and friendship. Human kids played with Kethmari children in crystal courtyards while their parents collaborated on architectural projects that nobody had ever seen before. But let me take you back to see how this miracle actually unfolded. It didn't happen overnight. Those first few months were tough, really tough. Human engineers like David Chin worked side by side with Kethmari biotechnicians, trying to understand technology that was completely alien to everything humans knew. Imagine trying to fix a computer when you've never seen electricity before. That's what it was like for humans learning Kethmari bioengineering. The breakthrough came when Dr. Rachel Adams figured out that Kethmari plants didn't just grow. They communicate with each other through chemical signals. Their whole agricultural system had been based on plants that could share information about soil conditions, weather patterns, and nutrient needs. When the Kethmari lost their psionic abilities, they also lost the knowledge of how to manually coordinate these plant networks. Rachel spent months living in the ruins of a Kethmari greenhouse, sleeping on the floor, eating ration bars, and studying every dying plant she could find. She learned to read the chemical signatures that Kethmari plants used to talk to each other. Then she taught the surviving Kethmari botanists how to manually create the chemical messages their plants needed to hear. The first garden that bloomed again was small, just a few dozen plants in what used to be a grand botanical preserve. But when those flowers opened and began glowing with their soft, natural light, every Kethmari in the settlement wept. They hadn't seen their plants bloom in over a decade. To them, it was like watching their world come back to life. Word spread quickly through the survivor communities. Other human Kethmari teams started having success with different types of biotechnology. Engineer Mike Torres figured out how to restart the water purification systems that had kept Kethmari cities clean for thousands of years. Linguist Professor Beth Williams worked with Kethmari artists to develop new ways of storing cultural knowledge in physical forms instead of shared memories. Within a year, the bio gardens were blooming on 3 worlds. Within 2 years, 7 entire planets had gardens that were not just surviving, but thriving. The flowers created new light patterns that were different from anything the Kethmari had grown before. These new patterns told stories. Stories of loss and recovery, of strangers becoming friends, of hope growing in the darkest places. The most amazing thing was watching human and Kethmari children play together. Kids adapt faster than adults, and they quickly figured out how to communicate across species barriers. 8-year-old Tommy Rodriguez became best friends with a young Kethmari named Velthera, even though they couldn't speak each other's languages. They invented their own games using crystal pieces and light patterns, creating art together in ways that amazed their parents. The adults weren't far behind. Human architects started working with Kethmari designers on building projects that combined human engineering with Kethmari aesthetics. They created structures that were both beautiful and practical, buildings that could house families while also serving as living art installations. The new hybrid architecture was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen before. The Kethmari had found ways to create beauty without their psionic networks, and it was incredible to witness. Their new art forms, born from silence and hardship, were somehow even more moving than their old works. Instead of shared thoughts creating collective masterpieces, individual Kethmari artists now poured their personal experiences into sculptures, paintings, and light displays that spoke to universal themes of loss, hope, and connection. They'd turned their greatest loss into their newest strength. The silence that had nearly destroyed them became the foundation for new forms of expression. Kethmari artists created installations about the experience of being alone in your own head for the first time. They made sculptures that capture the feeling of learning to communicate with your hands instead of your mind. They painted murals showing the moment when strangers from across the galaxy arrived to help them survive, and humanity had been there to help them do it all. Human teachers showed Kethmari children how to preserve knowledge in books and digital storage. Human farmers helped them develop non-bioengineered crops that could grow in their damaged soil. Human doctors helped them rebuild their healthcare systems from scratch. But the Galactic Council still demanded answers. Representatives from a dozen major civilizations sent formal complaints to Earth every month. How could humanity justify this irrational behavior? Why waste resources on a species that would never again be a major galactic power? What possible benefit could humans gain from saving a failed civilization? The Council's questions revealed everything wrong with their thinking. They couldn't understand doing something simply because it was right. They couldn't imagine helping someone without expecting something in return. To them, the Kethmari were worthless because they couldn't contribute to galactic trade or military power anymore. But humans saw something the Council couldn't see. Beauty has value, art has meaning, and people deserve to live regardless of whether they're useful to others. The Kethmari were creating wonders again, just different wonders than before, and humanity was proud to be part of that story. Ambassador Kate Morrison stood before the Galactic Council and transmitted images of the new Kethmari galleries. Sculptures made from light and sound told the story of beings who'd chosen compassion over convenience, beauty over profit. The council chamber was packed that day. Representatives from every major civilization in the galaxy had come to witness what they expected to be humanity's public humiliation. For 3 years, they watched humans pour resources into what they considered a worthless cause. Now they wanted answers, and they wanted humanity to admit their mistake. Kate walked into that chamber, knowing she was probably ending her diplomatic career. Earth Command had given her permission to speak freely, but they'd also made it clear that if this went badly, she'd be taking the blame. The pressure was enormous. She was speaking for all of humanity, justifying a decision that had cost billions of credits and thousands of human lives who had chosen to dedicate years of their lives to helping strangers. She started her presentation by showing the council what they'd never bothered to see. Real footage of Kethmari children learning to read human books alongside human children learning Kethmari Sign Language. Videos of elderly Kethmari teaching human engineers the secrets of bioarchitecture, while human doctors share medical techniques that had saved thousands of lives. The images were stunning. Gardens that combined human agricultural science with Kethmari bioart, creating food sources that were also living sculptures. Buildings that looked like they'd grown from the ground, mixing human structural engineering with Kethmari aesthetic principles. Art galleries where Kethmari sculptures made from light and sound told stories of loss, recovery, and friendship. But it was the children that really got at people. Human and Kethmari kids playing together, inventing games that neither species had ever imagined before. They created a pidgin language that mixed human words with Kethmari gestures, and they were teaching it to their parents. These kids didn't see aliens when they looked at each other. They just saw friends. The Galactic Council's reaction was exactly what Kate expected. Cold analysis, cost-benefit calculations, and demands for justification. High Counselor Vextherin of the Zolani Consortium stood up with a data pad full of economic projections. Ambassador Morrison, he said in that clipped, businesslike tone, your species has invested over 14 billion galactic credits in this endeavor. The Kethmari will never be a significant economic power again. They have no resources we need, no technology we want, and no strategic value. How do you justify this expenditure? General Krekstoff of the Vorthack was even more direct. Humans have weakened themselves to help a dying species. This shows poor judgment and threatens galactic stability. Strong species survive. Weak species die. This is natural law. Even the supposedly wise, ethereal communion questioned humanity's choice. Advisor Lamino spoke about cosmic balance and suggested that humanity had disrupted natural evolutionary processes by preventing the Kethmari extinction. Kate listened to all of this with growing anger. These beings talked about an entire civilization like they were discussing a failed business venture. They reduced living, breathing, creative people to numbers on a spreadsheet. They spoke about cosmic balance while ignoring the massive imbalance of leaving refugees to starve while the galaxy's wealthy civilizations looked the other way. You want to know why we saved them? Kate asked the assembled delegates, her voice carrying across the chamber with quiet intensity. We didn't do it because they were useful to us. We didn't do it because they had resources we wanted or technology we needed. We saved them because they were beautiful, and because when someone falls down, you help them back up. That's what intelligent species do. The chamber went completely silent. Kate could see the confusion on alien faces as they tried to process this concept. Help without profit? Aid without advantage? It genuinely didn't make sense to them. You call them a failed species, Kate continued, but look at what they've accomplished. They lost their greatest gift and turned that loss into new forms of art that move people to tears. They faced extinction and chose to spend their last years creating beauty instead of fighting over scraps. They welcomed strangers who came to help them, not with suspicion or demands, but with gratitude and friendship. She showed them more images. Kethmari artists creating installations about hope. Human and Kethmari scientists working together on projects that neither species could have imagined alone. Communities where two completely different species had learned to live together, not just in peace, but in genuine friendship. You ask what we gained from this. Kate's voice grew stronger. We gained something worth more than all your trade deals and military alliances. We gained family among the stars. We proved that intelligence isn't just about calculating profit margins or building bigger weapons. True intelligence is about recognizing beauty and choosing to protect it, even when it's not convenient. The galaxy had abandoned the Kethmari when they became inconvenient, but humanity had chosen to shield them, and in doing so, had discovered something precious. They'd found friends who created art from their scars and turned gardens into monuments to hope. The other species could keep their cold calculations and cost-benefit analyses. Humanity had something better. Proof that compassion wasn't weakness, it was strength. And sometimes the most human thing you can do is refuse to let beauty die in silence, no matter what the galaxy thinks about it.